I'm here with my friend, and were we colleagues? We were colleagues.
Yeah, I think so. At some point we were.
Was it like Phoenicia, New York, of all places?
It could have been. That's probably where it was. Yeah.
That's where it was.
Were you there for a butterfly?
I think I was. Yeah, I think I was covering. I was covering Richard Troxel.
That's where we met.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Nina Yoshida Nelsen, and a mezzo soprano and artistic director of Boston Lyric Opera now.
That's right. Yeah.
She's dragged her son Reese, who's a successful young pianist, and we're going to be talking about video game music because, realistically, you've heard what, like you've heard the music for Fortnite, Call of Duty, and probably Roblox or Minecraft.
2K. Yes, 2K.
2K. Oh, okay. I'm really excited about this because I love introducing professionals and their children recently to video game music. Obviously, I won't be able to show you everything, but the goal here is to show you highlights of stuff that's really cool, that is really popular, or even stuff that's especially not popular because there's so much. I mean, we're talking like 45 years now of like a musical genre that does borrow a lot from a bunch of different genres, but creates its own style. And yes, this is the sun. It's beautiful. My beautiful beard is being highlighted by some sort of holy being. So Reese, you're a pianist.
Yeah, I performed in Carnegie Hall 2 times, and I played
two times
with a orchestra, and then I've played on the barge, and then I've played in a couple of halls like in Indiana.
Is it like peaceful for you? It's like easy?
Sometimes, yeah. I don't like practicing though. Don't
they say like the road? Isn't that saying? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? You practice.
Practice. Yes.
But so, do you like piano music?
I don't really listen to much, like if any. I listen mostly to the pieces that I'm playing and practicing.
Okay. Would you want to listen to a piano piece right now?
Wait, sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, so first up is this wonderful piece from a game called League of Legends, and this piece is called Kindred. What are your thoughts on that piece? Like, what comes to mind?
In the beginning, it kind of sounds like you're walking around in a field, but then once it starts to get more tense and the rhythms start to get more like botched up, it starts to sound like you're on the ocean more.
Yeah. I mean, does this surprise you, Nina, this style of music? Were you expecting that?
You know, the thing that I thought was most interesting about it was that there was, like Reese said, there was a lot of rhythm, but there was not like percussion in the rhythm. So it was all rhythm in the, the piano or the cello or whatever. And so I thought that was really interesting to hear that it was rhythmic, but it wasn't like when you think about rhythm, you think about drums. And and it wasn't that. But when I was thinking that it was something that's happening behind people as they're playing a video game, I was like, that's a lot of work of recording this for something that probably people don't even hear. Some people, like Reese, always hears what's going on in the background of music, and he's really like, he'll sing melodies and stuff or like harmonies that I don't even hear when I'm listening to music, and he hears that. But for me, I hear more general like ambiance of stuff, and so but yeah, it's very classical, like something that you could hear in a symphony hall.
It's a very legitimate piece of music. I mean, all of these are legitimate, but in terms of like, how they're structured and stuff, this Kindred is actually the representation of death in League of Legends. So they're the two voices. There's the piano and the cello. They represent the two sides of Kindred. One of them is it's a sort of like sheep-like character. I know, don't get mad at me, League of Legends players. Just let me be as broad as possible. While the other one is a wolf, and so they symbolize the difference in the way that, like, essentially, if I recall correctly, the lore, the smaller of the two, the piano is a more peaceful entry to death, whereas the second one, the wolf, is if you try to run away, the wolf is there to hunt you down. And so that's why we hear some of the jaggedness. And it's also interesting because it's in the upper register, I think we really get the size of this, the character and I don't know, I find the legato line really interesting. But it's interesting, Greece, because you said you talked about the voyage, and maybe that is the journey of like carrying these characters that Kindred essentially kills and brings to the whatever other world is in League of Legends. It could be a journey, you know what I mean? And that's interesting how the legato line sort of guides that. Did you both like this piece? I mean, what was that thought process?
Yeah, no, I like pieces that like start to get more tense towards the end.
Yeah, I liked the way that the piano and the cello came together and then were solo and back and forth, and it told a story without any words.
Do you guys like rock?
I used to listen to a lot of rock. Yeah, I put on rock when my dad's in the car.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, you don't put on your hardcore rap. You don't put on Kendrick Lamar when okay.
I mean, sometimes I do.
If he's in the car with me, he does, but not with his dad.
My dad listens to every single lyric, and when something's like that, he's like, "Turn this off."
Whereas your mom just listens to the ambiance and the kind of the beat. And
you're like, oh, the melody's fantastic. The lyrics here suit the structure. But that's like me too. Though, to be fair, like melody always really comes out for, and I think that's interesting though, because I mean, you grew up as a pianist, right? I mean, like you've been playing piano since you were a kid. Well, you're still a kid, but since you were a child.
Yeah, since I was
5.
Yeah, so I mean, like, it makes sense that you would pick out harmony over, I think, your mom and I, who are more inclined to pick up melody, because as singers, we're much more selfish. And so we only think about what we hear, because, especially when we talk melodically, because that's the most interesting. I mean, even in these pieces, if there's a melody, I'm like there. You know what I mean? Whereas like some people really like the texture and stuff. That's interesting. That's actually really interesting.
I was thinking about this too, and that like as singers, we have words, right? And we have a story that is being told for us. And as a pianist, he doesn't have that. And so when he's like working on his own piano pieces, he comes up with whatever the story is. And he actually writes a story that he's going to that he can tell you about any one of his piano pieces. This is what I think is happening at this point. And so it's different because he gets to come up with a story, whereas we're usually prescribed a story already.
Well, isn't that interesting though? Because that opens up a whole discussion, because a lot of this music all of this music is essentially programmatic. It tells a story, and the purpose of video game music is to, whether it's highlighting a character, an environment, a situation, whatever it is, all of those are about a situation. And so they all tend to be programmatic rather than what's absolute or, just writing for writing's sake. But do you guys think that there's, we have two ends of the spectrum here in terms of like experience and age and history with music, but like, do you think that that's sort of where we are now, where every piece of music is basically written? I mean, yes, we know that people are writing, symphonies and stuff for the sake of the symphony, but do you think that all of it is sort of coming from a perspective of telling a story?
I'm not sure. I feel like most are. But like, there's a couple maybe that I listen to sometimes that don't really tell a story at all.
I would say that actually, when I even think about classical music as well, it is storytelling with when we think back to when it was composed, you can look at, what was happening politically, what was happening socially, and it was telling stories, with or without words when it was written hundreds of years ago as well. And so I would venture to say that, that's what the arts do so beautifully, is tell stories, right? In ways that other industries can't. We can tell stories that evoke imagination and emotion in ways that I'm not sure that, science or math can do. And that's our gift that we get to give to society.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's an interesting thought process too, because when we think about Bach and we think about writing pieces specifically, because he was commissioned by the church or whatever. Chances are, I don't think that Bach was sitting down and just writing something in a formulaic way, even though technically that's music. That's not necessarily guiding a story, but we don't. That's the thing about the beauty about context, is that context can be emotional. It doesn't necessarily have to be we'll never know what Bach was intending when he was writing what he was writing, but chances are, I'm sure that Bach was thinking about what his goal was with writing a piece, right? Emotionally, I would assume.
And pushing the limits and pushing how his audience thought about music. When you think about Bach and he really did push those boundaries and those limits at the time. And now we think of him as, the grandfather of classical music, right? But at the time, he was pushing those boundaries, and it was unexpected and it was exciting. That's sometimes what we forget about classical music, and where at the time it was boundary pushing and ahead of its time. Now it's hundreds of years old, but at the time it was incredibly relevant.
That actually leads me to another question before we listen to more music for you specifically, Nina. How do as an artistic director, obviously that's a balance in a game with the general manager and so on and so forth, but in all the different positions that exist in opera companies, but how do you reconcile that? How do you try to meet people in the middle? We're dealing with something that now isn't necessarily a modern, it's sort of timeless, but it still has its issues with age and with preconceived notions. And there's still a lot of, I get comments about this a lot, about how they would like classical music, but there's a degree of elitism that's still sort of prevalent, whether or not that's true. So how do you reconcile mitigating, I know this is a big question, but in your best words.
It's a huge question. And actually that's one of the reasons that I started working with Boston Lyric Opera, is because it was work that the company was already doing before I came. I came originally as an artist, as a singer, and when I was at the company, I was like, oh, this company is doing really good work. You're exactly right, in that a lot of people see opera as elitist or inaccessible or whatever that is. And yes, that can be true, but opera was never written to be a museum art form. It was written to push those boundaries, talk about politics in a way that was accessible for everyone at the time to come in and listen. And so here we are now, and it has become a museum art form. And there is definitely a group of patrons who want it to stay a museum art form. And so one of the things that when I'm thinking about how to program for our company, I think about how can we program a diverse group of operas that might have something interesting for everyone. So you might have an opera that is a really great entry point for someone who's never been to opera before. And what does that look like, and how do we outreach to those people? And then how are we also keeping people who are opera lovers interested? And we know that our patrons are going to be ready to expect something different from traditional opera, and that's exciting. And so even if we are doing a piece that was written 150 years ago, we're going to have an interesting take on it that will be something that you've never seen before. And so I think that that's something that as I'm looking at telling the story of Carmen or Madame Butterfly or Tosca or whatever. I'm thinking about how can we tell that story in a way that makes sense but is something that maybe our audiences haven't seen before and will evoke something different in them, seeing it in a different way for the first time. So those are some of the questions that I'm thinking about, but also how do we make it more contemporary so that some of the stuff that at the time 100 years ago was pushing the boundaries now feels very archaic. How can we make those changes, and how can we keep the art form alive so that it doesn't become something of the past?
Well, there's so much micro and macro sort of looking at it. It's an interesting juggle, I think, and I don't necessarily think that people realize that there's a lot of ebb and flow that occurs both, you know, on a very small scale, but also on a larger sort of systematic scale where we can actively try to change and maybe convince people, but, you know, but also do it in a way that isn't like sort of cajoling or pressuring or, you know, sort of domineering people into like, hey, you need to check this out and you need to pay attention to this. It's interesting. Hopefully that actually helped someone who maybe you've never seen an opera before,
right,
or maybe you've always been curious, but you sort of get a little disgusted or agitated with the sort of preconceived notions or certainly the notions that exist, I think, in the industry. But then there are people like Nana who are, you know, trying to push those boundaries forward so that you can go. So definitely, you know, if you've ever been curious about an opera, there's never a wrong time and there's never a bad time to go.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, you know, it's because we don't necessarily know about it that it seems really scary and overwhelming. You know, the amount of times that I hear people saying, well, I won't understand what's happening, or I don't have a tuxedo to wear to the opera, you know, the things like that we are scared of what we don't know. And so if we know that, hey, there are super titles and you're going to understand everything, and wear jeans. I wear jeans to the opera all the time. You know, he wears sweatpants and a sweatshirt and no one looks at him. Like, come with whoever you are and check it out from your point of view rather than from what you think it should be.
But it's so much more interesting then too, because then it's not homogenized, you know. Like it can be uniquely yours and you can experience it the way you want to. Yeah. Well, speaking of experiencing things the way we want to, this is an interesting one. This is from a game called Ragnarok Online. I don't know much about Ragnarok Online, so we're just going to wing it and talk about it as we see it. But this is called Absolitude, and I've played this before. It's just such a wonderful, like, it's just a bop, and it's fun because it like features a lot of harpsichord with like jazz. I should have thought about the fact that there is brass in there, and your dad and your husband is a French horn player. But so what's the vibe there? What do we think about that piece?
I honestly think it sounds kind of like a side quest piece that like you're walking through a village and like trying to search for something in like different houses or bars or something, and it sounds like, you know, Ragnarok makes you think of Vikings, so it sounds like it's like super early and somewhere like Ireland, and there's like villages and you're just walking through them.
It's got a bright vibe to it, doesn't it? It's not very heavy, right?
A side what?
A side quest. A side quest.
A side quest, which is different than a main quest. What do you think of the harpsichord? That's the part that really interests me.
The harpsichord really makes it sound like it's very, very long ago, because it's kind of like a piano, but it sounds way more like your strings instrument, and it sounds like that it's got that tangy tone to it. And so it makes it sound like it's super long ago.
Yeah. It's like a melding of ancient and current with the brass and the more jazz like sounds and the percussion, and then with the harpsichord, which was what was, you know, way back in Bach's time.
Does that appeal to you, Nina? Like that sound, like being that it's something that we don't often hear. So when I heard this the first time, I was like really excited about it, because I was like, whoa, harpsichord with like jazz. I've never heard this before. Like,
oh no, it's totally appealing and interesting and unusual, you know, something that you aren't used to hearing. But I think that's always exciting when it's something that you're not used to hearing. It makes you maybe listen more intently.
This is a game that came out really recently. It's called Metaphor ReFantazio, and this particular battle theme actually features a Japanese monk, which is very unique.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds like a battle theme. I think it could be like maybe the one against the final boss in the end, because the guy that was like yelling, it just kind of like started to get more and more intense the more that he started yelling, because at first it just sounded like he was saying lyrics, but I couldn't understand. It just sounded like he was saying lyrics, but it just got more intense over time. And then also the background music, it's like da 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 da. It just sounds super intense.
Yeah, that voice was totally unexpected. At first I was just like, oh, this is, you know, like movie music or background music or whatever. Like, it felt like you were right, like the final something, right? And then all of a sudden this voice came out and then in choir I was like, oh, that came from nowhere. And then, you know, it went back to like very expected. Then all of a sudden he came back at that and you're like, what in the world?
Well, funny enough, it's actually just the regular the regular battle theme. This is like a pretty casual, like not main boss theme. And it's actually, so it's interesting because language wise, it's in Esperanto, which is a mixture of all Romance languages. And it's so unique and so interesting. You know, I think, well, so it's modern and it has this sort of archaic sound to it. And yet it's fresh. I mean, this is the thing that sometimes I feel like opera is sort of, there's a disconnect, because a lot of these composers that are existing in the video game space are like taking something that's very old and then like modernizing it. It's so interesting, and it's like, how do we do that? You know what I mean? In a classical, like in the classical genre world, it's so interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that we're all kind of like battling with in the classical music genre. Is movie music, video game music has done that, right? And that is like the next step of classical music, if you will. And we as producing operations haven't quite figured out what that means for us, because it really is, when you listen to the evolution of classical music, that is what movie music is and what video game music is. And it is that next step. But how you take that and put it on the stage, I think, is something that we're all questioning, especially when we are now in a society where we do like to stay home and watch TV and videos and play video games, and that's where we are as a society. So how do we, as performing arts entities, take what people are wanting and needing and used to now doing with their lives at home, and figure out how to bring ourselves into people's homes to watch and experience, or get people excited enough that they will want to leave their homes, want to leave what they're doing to come experience something that they know and are interested in, but have to leave their houses in order to experience it.
Well, I think a piece like this too is such an interesting bridge to gap, because if you think about it, I mean, this is not that dissimilar from any cabaletta that we would hear. Like a cabaletta would be, so cavatina and cabaletta in bel canto predominantly would be, I'm telling them, not you, by the way. You're like, I don't know what that is.
You know what it is?
Yeah, no idea.
So let me make sure that I remember my terms. But cavatina is the slower of the two. So an aria would be, a complete solo song. And then the cavatina is the slower section, which is usually much more emotional, much more expressive. And then we move into a cabaletta, which is a much faster and agitated state. Sometimes there's a section in between called a recitative, which would be, like sort of like, for the audience, it would be like an explanation of what's occurring. And then we dive into the faster section. Did I get that right, Nina? Yeah, I think I did.
I would say so. Yeah. A recitative is where the story is told. The first part, the slow part of the aria, is really where like the longing would be, right? Or sadness or whatever. And then into the anger or excitement or frustration, the cabaret. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, like, in theory, yes, this is a battle theme that we hear specifically when we're fighting battles in this particular game, or really any battle theme. And then, but it does remind me of pieces like Di Quella Pira or other really dominant battle themes. The cabaletta for, Alfredo in La Traviata in Act 2. Like, I can't think of anything else. Or I think Azucena in Trovatore has a cabaletta.
You get this a lot with the lead characters, right? Where you're really watching them emotionally go through this journey, and it's never the time where you're telling us like the story. The story is moving forward. It's where the emotions are moving forward, if you will.
Well, in a lot of ways too, like, it's interesting because every time there's a battle theme in a video game, that's usually when the stakes are really high. Obviously, you'll get, if you're doing like random encounters and you're exploring a map, sometimes you get it. But in general, this kind of theme shows up, depending on the context, it shows up with moments of extreme emotional stakes. Like, it's high stakes. There's a battle we have to fight. We have to, it's interesting how in a lot of ways video games feel like modern operas, despite the fact that there's no singing, of course, so that term sort of is a moot point, but in terms of like all the music is emotional. It's derived from an emotional an urgency, which is really interesting. Video games and opera are the only two mediums I really see this, where like music like drives forward the impetus, you know what I mean? Did you guys like this piece?
I would say so. It was unexpected and took a turn for me, which I always find interesting. The underlying theme felt very like you've heard it before in a million different ways. But then when the voice came in, I was like, oh, that's something new.
That's actually an interesting, sorry, not to put you on the spot, but that's an interesting thought process you just shared, because that's one thing that I think about a lot is sometimes I have guests on, and in the past I have had guests who've been like, well, yeah, that's good, but I mean, I've heard that like a million times. Whereas like I've also heard it a million times, and yet for me, it like derives a certain excitement because I've heard it a million times. So like it feels like because it's in this setting of video games, it's like, oh, this is so cool, I've heard this. So like, can you like sort of if you don't mind, elaborate on that? Like, does hearing something a lot sort of then not devalue it, but does it sort of like you're looking for something fresher, or like what's the sort of like what's your perspective on that?
Well, yeah, I think you're hitting on two different things. One, in that, like, are you hearing the same thing, a bunch of different times? And I think that there's something comforting and exciting and hearing maybe the same music 100 different times sung in different ways or performed in different ways. And there's something really exciting about that, and hearing the way that different people have different takes on whatever musical ideas or whatever, that's why you listen to 10 different people play the same thing or sing the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's different from hearing something that sounds like everything else. Like, so when I was saying, yeah, it felt like I've heard it before, it was that it had the same sound to a lot of different things that I've heard before. I probably haven't actually heard this music before, but it didn't feel, I just felt like, okay, I can sit back and listen because I've heard this before. So I think there's two different ways of looking at that. And it can be exciting when you know something so well that you're hearing all the little differences of the same piece in, 10 different ways or 15 different ways. And you hear that and you're like, ooh, that's a neat take on that. Whereas if it just sounds like something that's generic and you've heard it before, it's a different,
Yeah, of course. Well, I think that this is a really interesting point of discussion, though, and something that, you're open-minded, so it's easier to have that conversation with you, whereas someone who's like, I've heard it. Okay. Well, can't really go anywhere with that. Speaking of variations on themes, have you ever heard this One Winged Angel by chance? Do you know it's like one of the most famous video game pieces ever. Well, it's from Final Fantasy VII, and this particular version is actually from there was a movie. And they created it expanded on the story of Final Fantasy VII. It's called Advent Children, and this particular theme is essentially the rock version of One Winged Angel, which is very Stravinsky-like.
I mean, I feel like there's a lot to say about it. In the beginning, it kind of sounds like a march where you can see like the enemy's big like team or army like start marching towards you, and then like the guitar. Then it sounds like it's a montage of like all the heroes and like all the main characters, and then it just sounds like a bunch of fighting for a long time. There's a couple parts where it sounds like a change of setting, and then like the part where it's just like all the orchestra cuts out and it's just the guitar going like da 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 da. It sounds like you or like the big enemy got like a power up or something that can like change the whole fight, because it's just like out of nowhere. And then like the rock part comes right back, and then it turns into a flute section, and that could be like a change of setting where you defeat the first boss, and then like you get out of the building, and then you're met with another big army or something, because then the rock comes back again.
You have much more interesting imagination than I do. I was sitting here thinking about not story and how interesting it would be to hear the track of like choir and orchestra on its own, and then hear the drum kit and guitar on its own, and hear how it is really like two different things and could totally exist on their own, and how when they're put together, it completely changes everything. But it felt like, to me, at first we were like, oh yeah, it sounds like a horror movie. Then it almost felt like a requiem to me, and I was
interesting
bits of pieces of requiems. It really is in some ways two tracks, a classical track and a rock track that have been put together, and hearing them on their own, they would probably be great as well. And then hearing them together, it changes everything completely.
Yeah, I mean, 1,000,000%. Maybe that was a bad example. If you want to listen to the original, we can put on the original if that would be interesting to you. It's up to you.
Is that interesting to you?
Whatever or if you want to show us, yeah, you can.
It's not very long. Let me just, you might as well. I mean, we're here. It's interesting. I don't want to spoil too much. I feel like this is a game that Final Fantasy VII is a game that like every gamer should play at one point. You know, the holidays coming up. Just saying. Although it's oh no, you can get it everywhere. But all that to say, like it's an RPG. It's a role playing game. Role playing game. And it's a really meaningful story. It's complex. It's interesting. It talks about saving the planet. Clones, and this particular theme is about Sephiroth. Darth Vader for movies is Sephiroth for video games. It's that kind of stature when it comes to bosses. Bosses being like the big bads of a game, the main antagonist, the main villain. And this is such a unique piece because it does borrow from The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. It does borrow from, Nobuo Uematsu is the composer, and this is like the soundtrack of my childhood, for instance, when I was 10, 14, you're right. I mean, like all of those emotions that you're talking about, Reese, like those are all in here. Now, maybe not moment for moment, but like the push and pull of battle is all there. And like obviously if this is the final piece of music that exists in Final Fantasy VII, so like the stakes are incredibly high because it's literally the fate of the planet and your party and your friends and your own life. So like we have to have that, and it's interesting because it's not just fast. There's also like some slow moments. But let's listen to the this is an orchestral.
Listen to this. So if this is 7, has this theme appeared in 65432 and 1 as well?
No. So Final Fantasy was called Final Fantasy because, if I recall correctly, essentially it was the last push to try and make something before I believe not that the studio shut down, but essentially like they were like, let's just try this and see if it works. And so they made Final Fantasy, and then it picked up steam, and then they were able to continue it. So it's just kept the name, the moniker, but it's not. They're not related.
Okay.
So this is the orchestral version of that. This is not what it sounded like, but this is what, there's a concert that tours, and I've actually seen it in Boston, called Distant Worlds, where they feature the music of Final Fantasy. So it starts the same. Which do you like better? Like what stands out to you about those two differences?
I like this one a little bit better because I feel like it makes more sense to be in a video game than the other one does, because this one shows the emotion a lot more now that I know that it's in like the final battle with like the big boss. It shows the emotion a lot more, and I feel like the guitar in the other one was like a little out of place, just a little.
Yeah, we were talking about that. You said the first one felt more
like just based on the action.
And the second one felt on
more like the storyline and what was at stake.
To me, it made much more sense musically. It felt like the arc totally made sense, whereas when we had the drum kit and the guitar, all of a sudden it just felt like, oh my gosh, we're totally out of whatever it was.
Did it feel unique in its own writing, even though it was like, obviously there were some borrowings from Stravinsky and like Rite of Spring, or like did this one feel more special?
I feel like it did, but it wasn't as like unique as the other one. But this one did feel a little bit more special, and it felt like it more to the game and like what was going on.
Yeah, to me, the first one felt like it was trying to be different for different sake, if you will, and this one felt much more cohesive in musical language.
Got it. That's cool.
What do you think?
I have a problem where I enjoy everything it's really hard for me to dislike something. I'm really partial to the first one because not only just nostalgia, but I also just find the fact that it's like created by, I mean, this is the music that got me into music. So like this opened the floodgates for me. So on the one hand, I like the Black Mages. That's the other version, the Black Mages version. But this original, I think it's so elegant in its like fear and in the way that it describes. You're right, because it is a horror theme. I mean, like I won't spoil it in case Reese ever want to play it. But I mean the majesty of this character. I mean, like he's terrifying, and what's terrifying about him is that his imagery is that of an angel of death, right? And so like so that is a little bit of a spoiler, but I won't spoil the plot. But like this is the thing about video game music, is that when we listen to it out of context, like this is really like, hey, let's listen to video game music together. Let me show you what's possible within this medium, right? Francesca Zambello has a really neat production of Madama Butterfly where she puts it in the in the US consulate. I know you probably know this. Yeah. She puts instead of being like in the garden at the house, like it's really cool. And what I like about that is it defies expectation and it flips the script, right? Instead of seeing it as we traditionally do, we see it in a new light. And so in this particular instance, the reason why this music is so terrifying, on top of it being the final boss and all that other stuff, is that we're really seeing an image of like a multi-winged angel that, with the torso of a man, and then the sky is bright blue and the clouds and everything is about it is religious and holy. But what we're getting instead musically is that of, destruction and chaos. And, so I think that's why it's so effective. And that's why also like musically, it's just like really well done. Also the fact that he literally composed all these different pieces and put them together like a jigsaw puzzle is really crazy to me as like from a compositional perspective, where it's like he didn't start from start to finish. He like just was like, oh, maybe this section will go, and it's like, so yeah, anyway, I like the piece.
I have an aside, since you brought up Madame Butterfly. There's a new production by Matthew Ozawa of Madame Butterfly where Pinkerton is seeing it all through VR. And
what?
So it's all his fantasy through this video game that he's playing the video game. He gets to pick whichever, Madame Butterfly or Kate Pinkerton, and it's all through the eyes of VR.
Whoa! How do you even? See, that's something I would want to see on stage, because it's like, how do you do that? I mean, like that's really interesting. I also love Matthew Ozawa's vision too.
Me too. Yeah, come see it. I'm gonna be in it in Utah next spring. Come see it.
One of the cool things about video games is its history, and one of the most consistent prejudice that I hear against it, less so now, is that it's all a series of beeps and boops. But what's really cool is that beeps and boops can actually also be transformed and elevated. And so in this particular example, we're going to listen to two pieces. One is from Mega Man 2. Mega Man 2 came out in 1988. So I was 1 year old. Okay, so that's one thing. And then the second example is a game called Void Stranger. And Void Stranger came out in 2023. And so what we do is we take this chiptune soundscape and actually evolve it. So that's also an interesting thing, because when we look at the history of video games, the music of the 80s and into the 90s was how it was all done on the computer. And so to then take it and also evolve it is very interesting. It's essentially, even though video game music is its own category, there's also other delineations of it, which I find really interesting. So this is Mega Man 2's title part 2. So emotionally, like what do you think about when you listen to a piece like that? Like what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Honestly, it kind of just sounds super fast paced. Like there's only one objective of the game, and you're just trying to get to the end of it.
To me, I feel like it should be like jumping, like kind of like Mario, right?
Yeah.
Little coins when you jump up, and
it's interesting how there's still like a little bit of harmony in there too. You know, like there's still some limited chord structure too, which is really interesting. Yeah, I mean, emotionally, it's like we got to get to it. We have to like take a step in and go for it. It's really interesting to sharply pivot to Void Stranger just to hear how different the similar style can be.
feel like the first one is a lot more bland and just like the same thing over and over again. And then this one, I mean, there's a lot more to it, but I feel like the synthesizer makes it less emotional and less like actually makes you like super, super involved into the music, because I feel like it's just, it doesn't show much emotion. And even though it has like more than the other one does, and there's like more to it, I wouldn't say it would be as like meaningful to a game or a storyline as much as the other ones.
Because of the sound choice, the synthesized choice.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly interesting because talking about bland, I think part of the problem is that that's all that they could do. Interestingly enough, now there are examples of other composers that were able to take that and sort of like really go somewhere with it, but it was hard because, you know, they were literally programming like in the computer. Like it wasn't even like through music, it was essentially through a computer synthesizing it, you know, and creating it. It's a whole complicated process that I actually am trying to learn more about right now because it's really complex. But you're right, in terms of bland, like it does repeat quite a bit and it can only do so many things because of the limitations of the hardware. It's so interesting to think about 40 years and how much things have shifted in how we're producing music digitally, but also sound and stuff. I mean, it's you know, what you bring up is valid. And Nina, what do you think?
So are you saying that 40 years ago, they were unable to take like a symphony orchestra, record it, and then put it together with a video game? Because they couldn't. They really couldn't. They could take themes like classical pieces and like produce like limited versions of like whatever. I can't remember off the top of my head. Nothing's coming to mind, but I know that they've done like there have been like single channel versions of some classical music theme, like really bare bones, like as if you were playing just the right hand on the piano or something. But they couldn't. There's no way. They didn't have the capacity technologically to really evolve beyond that. Interesting. And now with the capacity of the technology, it's come back to almost to classical music, if you will. Like it's interesting that as the technology has and the ability has grown, we're coming around to more similar sounds to, you know, what we were used to a couple hundred years ago.
Yeah.
Fascinating to think about. I didn't know that that's why music and video games was the way it was. It's because it had to do with the programming limitations.
I also find it interesting that we're taking a sound from, you know, 40-ish years ago and then modernizing it while still like keeping the sort of integrity of the it's called chip tune, keeping the integrity of the chip sound, which is also really interesting because it's essentially like evolving something that like was a necessity at a time because that's all they could do, and then now we're taking it and like, you know, sort of modernizing it, even though while retaining that integrity of it. It's very interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to cut you off, by the way.
No. It was interesting for me to I never knew that's why music was the way it was in video games 40 years ago. But I'd have to agree with Reese. There's something pretty incredible about hearing, even if it's been recorded strings and voices and what it evokes in you, hearing that versus something that's, you know, synthesized and
computerized.
Yeah. But I loved hearing the way that they took what was 40 years ago and then really rearranged the rhythms and the beat, and that it wasn't just like, you know, you weren't just on a beat like this. It was, you were going like this in and out of it wasn't just like, here we go, there's a beat. But I was like, yeah.
You
know, and I think that was really cool.
It's an interesting thing, you know. Video game history is actually like, I mean, in the scope of things, in the scheme of things, it's not very long, and the way that the technology has advanced to be where we are today, certainly musically, but also like visually, is really interesting. And you know, I mean, that metaphor ReFantazio piece with the monk, like that came out this year. And to think like Mega Man 2, you know, 1988, to metaphor to Void Stranger, which is a similar style but different, you know, like that's last year. You know, I wonder where we can go if it will evolve, or if it will retain sort of this, you know, it's fascinating. We have listened to a lot of string stuff, so I think it's time to really screw around here and check out a pop punk theme and a heavy metal theme. Which one do we want first? This is Undefeatable from Sonic Frontiers. Sonic, again, just celebrated, I think, 30 years. You know, it's come a long way from, you know, Sonic to... Well, you know what? I think we got to do it where we listen to something from Sonic... Yeah, okay, hold on. Let me do this way. Let's do Aquatic Ruin Zone from Sonic 2 as an example. So first of all, let's talk about the fact that that's only not that many years from Mega Man 2. Similar sound style, but notice how much more, even just like, I think it was, 6 years or so, how different that.
Yeah, no, I feel like there's way more things going on in the music than there was in Mega Man 2, because I feel like there's so many more different like harmonies like to the melody than there were, because like it's crazy how much it could like advance and move forward in just like a couple years.
To me, that sounds very like stereotypical video game music.
I
mean, but that's because it's probably what was around when, people I was around were playing video games.
This would probably be more in line with what people call the beeps and boops of the Super Nintendo and Sega Saturn, and this is like the classic video game music sound. But it's interesting though, because Sonic's music here, Sonic 2, has a ton of harmony and a ton of styles, and each one of these tracks is individual and unique. But now listen, here's the difference. Let's check out this. This is crazy. So this is Undefeatable from the most recent Sonic game, not counting Sonic X Shadows Generations. This is called this is from Sonic Frontiers.
I'm hanging on to the other side. I won't give up till the end of May.
So obviously not similar at all, but what do we think of that evolution? What do we think obviously of the song itself?
Yeah, no, it's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. I feel like it's smart that they would put the newer, like this song in the newer one, because as my mom was talking about, it does something to your nervous system, which gets you like pumped up and it gets your body like moving and stuff, which
For sure.
can make people like want to play more, get in more fights, because it can make them feel like excited and stuff.
Yeah. That's what I was noticing more than anything, was how my nervous system reacted to that music versus some of the other music we've been listening to. And I could feel myself getting like more filled with anxiety as we were sitting there listening to it, which was interesting to me. And I'm sure that's all been studied, and like how the music affects whatever you're doing with the game or whatever. And it's fascinating.
It's an incredible thing how, not dissimilarly to symphony or certainly opera, that we can create emotional connections with pieces that cause XYZ type of emotion, right? I think that's such a fascinating thing. And it's interesting how, the first Sonic piece I played for you is a lot more chill and a lot more general, whereas like this is specifically a boss theme, so inherently it's about being undefeatable, being strong, being courageous. I mean, did you like both in a different way, or did you have a preference, both of you?
Honestly, I like the first one more. This is
really
how I like type of music. I don't really listen to punk or anything, but like I feel like the second one would be better to like play in a battle with than the first one, because the first one's you're just running around trying to collect coins.
Yeah, I don't know that I had a preference for either of them. I think the preference would be for some of the other music we've listened to already. But interesting to hear the choice in style for a certain game. It's so varies so hugely.
Main themes are really interesting. All video games essentially have a main theme. When you turn on the game, the main menu screen, that can sometimes be a theme that then comes back throughout the video game, and it makes it really exciting because it's like that earworm, that leitmotif. There's a theme in Monster Hunter called Proof of a Hero, and Proof of a Hero plays when you're at, like really like your back is against the wall, you're about to kill a giant monster. It's been really difficult. You've probably died a lot of times, but finally you get it. 20 minutes in, you're almost at the end, and this theme kicks in, and it's not always in the main theme, but or in the title screen, but Proof of a Hero is a main theme that I think carries a lot with it, and I really love it. It's really beautiful, and it's not quite so bombastic as the other themes we've heard. It's very John Williams-esque, but hopefully you both enjoy it. What do we think?
Yeah, no, it sounds so much like John Williams. Like, it sounds a lot like Jurassic Park and very open world. It was my favorite of the ones so far.
It's really prescriptive. It goes from the brass to the soaring strings with the woodwinds on top and and then back to the brass and everybody. And it feels like it's something that, if you were watching, I was saying to Reese, in some ways I feel like I should be either on a ride at Disneyland or the credits from a movie, and it makes sense the way it goes from one thing to the other and then back, and then you rehear the theme again and you recognize it because you've heard it a first time, and the ending is coming because you feel it getting ready to
you build
next
it
end, and then bum 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 or whatever.
Do you want to hear a variation on that theme?
Yeah.
This is a prime example of something that we obviously do see in a classical music landscape, of taking a theme and creating around it and reusing it in multiple different ways. This is the latest game that came out, Monster Hunter Rise. It's just different composers, but same style.
Are these all recorded usually with musicians who are union affiliated, and so there are a lot of rules on this type of recording and whatnot?
I don't know for sure, but I would say that more likely than not, they would certainly be union. And they would, but I mean, there are pickup orchestras for video game music all over the place now. It's really becoming very popular. In fact, I'm seeing a real shift in like just to do it. I've also, there's a ton of tours. Obviously, Jeff has played in them, but there's a ton of tours that are occurring now where they're arranging the pieces, and those are being done by classical musicians or musicians in the symphony or pickup orchestras specific, and then they call it the like whatever video game orchestra. Mm-hmm. The other thing with these particular recordings is that oftentimes they'll either be VSTs, so like they'll create it on the computer, and then they'll use the sound fonts to create the the horns and whatever. Mm-hmm. Or it'll be like, I know that I'm pretty sure Austin Winery, who's a modern video game composer, he'll sometimes go to Abbey Road Studios in London. So they can be, the LA. I'm pretty sure the LA, you know what I'm talking about, the LA singers for the symphony.
Oh yeah,
the chorale. Well, obviously they do movies, but they also will be tapped to do video games. And then there's specific places. I know someone in Boston actually who was on the Final Fantasy 15 soundtrack. So like that was probably done with the BLO, or the London Phil gets prescripted a lot for a game called Genshin Impact to do music. So it just depends. But yeah, I would say more often than not they're union, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some regulations and stuff on them.
See, there you go. Did the OG?
Yeah, that's what I asked him. I said, do you like the first one or the second one better?
I said I like the first one a little bit more because like I feel like it's so much more like nice, like soothing, I guess, and like I really like melodies and the harmonies in the other one. And then this one, I feel like I like it a lot too. This one, I feel like it sounds a little bit more like a battle than the other one does.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same way, Nina?
Yeah, this one felt epic to me. The first one felt like you could see yourself soaring over something or flying, or like you could see yourself out in nature. This one just felt much more like a saga, epic.
Yeah, I could see that. Obviously, the organ plays a part in that too, and there's more of a fight against like the devil, if you will. Whereas like the first one feels very heroic and triumphant, and really about you, the hunter. In the particular case, you know, like you're the one slaying these monsters. Whereas this one feels much more like a push and pull that is in there for sure. And actually, you know, Reese, like obviously I picked a lot of these because your mom was coming on the channel, but like, what does this make you think about? Like, you know, being that you have a wide palette of musical tastes, but I was curious for your generational perspective, like how does this feel?
Yeah, I don't really play many video games like this, like I said, but it's a very different type of genre that you can tell is in a video game, because I mean, like when you listen to it, it doesn't sound like, oh, this is like a song,
Something you would hear on the radio.
Yeah, the great thing about it is that sometimes you can't tell, and it sounds like it could be great on like either soundtracks, and it would be like moving to a storyline or plot.
Yeah. Does it make you want to play some of these games?
Yeah, but I can't really tell what it's about because of the soundtrack, because they all sound really good to a plot or a storyline, and then like the battles sound intense, and so that doesn't really give away much of the video game. But yeah, I feel like some of these would make me want to play them. Yeah.
Do you think that these pieces it's good to listen to these pieces like this, or do you think it's less impactful to listen to like a large group of music?
Yeah, I feel like it's good for the imagination, because all these have a really big story to it, and when you listen to it, you can think in your head like, oh, this is probably happening, or so and so is probably happening, and it's good to like use your imagination to it, and it can help you make stories in your head. So I feel like I could listen to.
What do you think, Nina? I mean, like this is your first sort of like real taste of video game music, and with your obviously extended knowledge and experience of the industry, of classical music industry, like what's your sort of take on this style of music and this experience?
I mean, to me, it is just such an obvious extension of classical symphonic music, some opera, like opera chorus type stuff as well. Like it is just so obvious. It's interesting in that now as a society we are much more used to seeing pictures that go along with music. So as Reese says, it forces you to use your imagination, which is when you're not looking at something and watching something go along visually with what you're hearing. It makes you, though, wonder what you would be seeing if you were playing the video game. And so it's fascinating to think about how then, if we look at that in reversal with the fact that that's where we are now as a culture, expecting to see something visually with this type of music, how do we take that and apply that to as classical music organizations, and take that information and be like, oh, okay, maybe this is something we need to consider as we're programming. This is something we're used to seeing and hearing together. So how can we use that and make it accessible to audiences who might be interested?
Well, and as a general like listener, like what's your sort of feeling on this music, like having sort of digested a whole swath of it in a short amount of time?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful music, and they are masterpieces. It's beautiful compositions of depth, like music that carries depth and weight and emotion and feelings. And it's not, if you think of video games, sometimes you think of just like silly fun, it's, you know, extracurricular stuff, but the music that we're hearing is so much more than just something that's, you know, trite and fun and silly. It's full of depth and
Has it changed your perspective on it?
I don't think so. I've watched some of your stuff on your channel before, so I know that this music is out there. I don't know if it makes me want to play the video games anymore, but I'm
Sure.
happy to listen to the music. It's beautiful.
Sometimes we can get hung up on, like you said, visuals, but like really taking a step back and listening to something for the sake of listening to it. And what does it mean? What is it? And I think, the hard thing is that there is no right or wrong when it comes to music. What we feel is right. And really like having that be a guiding force. And I know that sounds like woo woo stuff, but at the same time, like we all know and we understand that like that's actually the basis of good music, is allowing us to sort of be transported, regardless of whether we know context or we know the opera or we know the video game or we know whatever. The goal ultimately is to feel and to try to connect to our own lived context with the feeling,
Yeah, and to understand that everyone has different opinions and feelings, and in my opinion, I want someone to walk away with something. I want that person to have strong opinions about something. And that's how I know whether they are good, whether they come away walking away from something saying this was the most incredible experience or this was the most awful experience. I want them to have strong opinions, because that, in my opinion, is where art is made. And if you're just doing something that's, sort of okay across the board, is that actually creating impact and creating conversation? I want it's okay for people to not like what I'm doing, but I want them to walk away and saying I have a strong opinion about this, and that's art. That's
very interesting, because in a consumeristic sort of idea, especially when we look at video games as a product, it'd be really easy. I think people don't always understand that like you can actually totally dislike something, and that's a valid opinion because you've like come away with it with an opinion, and having an opinion about something is really like ultimately the most important aspect of it. And I think people, if you don't like it, then that means it's automatically that it's bad or something, and I don't think that's
it's okay to not like it. Totally on the side, I texted my husband to see if he's ever played on a video game soundtrack, and he said he has played on a Halo soundtrack.
And
oh, cool.
Arkham Knights.
Batman's Arkham Knights, something like that.
Wow, Batman Arkham Knight, yeah.
Anyway,
wow,
that was so.
That's cool.
So listen to the French horn on those, and my husband is in some of those tracks.
Which Halo?
He says he has no idea which one it was, an early one.
Okay, someone's gonna be like, "You didn't play the Halo soundtrack for them." Listen. They can go home and
Jeff could play it
can have their husband and father. Yeah. I do want to wrap this up with a piece that I heard literally 3 days ago that blew me away. It's from a game called Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and it's called Homecoming. bit of a journey there.
Yeah, I know. It sounds very like open world, like you're discovering a new biome that you just unlocked, and like there's beautiful animals, like creatures flying around, and then like it could be in a jungle or it could be mountainous, but it sounds like you're just exploring a new biome, like places.
I felt like it sounded like heartbreak and death.
I don't know the actual premise of this. To me, it also it sounds like hope and possibility, and then it's quickly shunned by. It's like replaced by death and like a irreversible change. You know what I mean? Like something happens.
Yeah.
I could see Reese. Why I could see why you'd feel that way because of how vast and legato and like sort of flowing. It almost feels like ascending, like a heavenly sort of thing. So it makes sense why you would see like a biome, flying animals is sort of like. But there is, I mean, well, so Nina, why do you think that why do you think death and loss sort of kick in first for you, or more prominently?
Well, I think also because that's what it felt like more towards the ending, whereas towards the beginning it felt much more like in the Highlands somewhere or something like that. There were with the flute
for sure.
bits and pieces that were had some almost Orientalist sounds as well. That you were like, okay, where are we? What does this evoke any specific time and place? And I don't know that it really did because it kind of went in different places for me and times. But then towards the end, it felt like it got heavier and heavier sonically, not weight wise, but just emotionally. It's hard to explain emotional versus like the weight.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Yeah,
I know what you mean.
But then at the very end, it left with or is it not? That last chord. It was kind of, it felt like it was all wrapping down and like just heavy and sad. And then you had this almost bit of hope at the very end of like, or not.
Were there any musical things that stuck out to both of you in that piece?
No, I just feel like everything was like legato and like very long phrases.
Yeah, when the chorus came in, it felt almost heavenly. And that was when I sort of started going towards maybe it is death and rebirth or something, but the chimes and I mean it went through a lot of different things instrumentally, which I thought was interesting.
It's quite the powerful piece. I heard it and I went into this rant about how important video game music is and how like it shouldn't be like disparaged, or it should really be built up because of how evocative it is and how emotionally deep it is, and you can create a whole like feeling in that piece, and all of it would be valid. It's a very profound, like reflective piece on life and joys and sorrows and flying through the air and beautiful biomes. I mean, all that stuff is totally valid and really has a place in it for sure. So of all the pieces that we've listened to, and we've listened to, I mean, quite a bit, we've gone on quite the journey. Was there a particular piece that really stuck out to both of you individually?
I just like the one about the dragon, like capture or hunter.
Oh, Proof of a Hero?
Yeah.
I think the one that sticks out to me that was just the most unexpected was the one with the man chanting.
Oh, the monk? Yeah, the Buddhist monk?
Yeah. And I was, as we were sitting here, as you were just asking us that, I found it interesting that there isn't more solo voice on any of these. It's all very like choral, orchestral, and not a lot of solo, which is interesting.
Yeah,
maybe that's
there's plenty.
Yeah.
I just didn't bring it per se, but there's hundreds of pieces with solo voice, mostly soprano. Honestly, it's actually very interesting how a soprano voice tends to the very like celestial. It tends to be very like. You'll get a lot of children's choir. You'll definitely get a lot of solo. There is one particular piece that I did show Christine Gerke that you might find interesting called Nostalgia Phantasm, which features like a predominant soprano soloist. But in general, you do tend to find larger swaths of choral pieces and sort of like as a cohesive thing rather than individual. Do you feel like you would seek out a concert of video game music?
Yeah.
Now that like you sort of like have the like basis for what it could sound like.
Yeah. Like you said, I think it absolutely there should be, a first half video game, second half Mozart Requiem or Verdi Requiem or something like that.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a lot of potential for that And then thinking about, if you do that, then what do you do visually? Do you let everybody just imagine it while watching a symphony orchestra on stage, or do you create something that that plays on a screen behind a symphony orchestra? And if you do that with video game music, why don't you do that with Verdi Requiem as well, or whatever? And so how can you tie either way, whichever way you decide to go, make that connection between the two, because they are so connected and are absolutely an extension of one another.
I think it's a new frontier. I think it's something that has not really been explored nearly enough, and I'm starting to percolate on how to do it. But it takes more than one person to sort of put two and two together and find the best options. But it's definitely something that intrigues me, because there's a whole world out there of just hungry people for musical representation, and just like this music deserves to be continually celebrated, not just in special concerts, but also in the limelight. The way that it moves people is no different than the way that we try to move people every day when we get out on stage and perform and sing and play piano in Carnegie Hall without really practicing, and all that other stuff. Like it's an impressive thing.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, like, where will that technology go so we can do more of that? Does it mean that we're doing it in person? Does it mean that we're doing it in virtual reality? And, placing people in the middle of a concert of both video game music and symphonic music, right? Because it is an untapped market. Where do we go? And there's so much.
Do you turn orchestra concerts into video games? Do you have an interactive part, or are you an opera where they get to participate in some way with like playing? I don't know how you mold that, but there's potential there for sure.
Yeah, there is. And already you've got operas that have augmented reality where you can sit in the opera and watch it just as it is, or put on glasses and watch the augmented reality while you're still hearing the wow, human voice that's unamplified. So there's people are starting to dabble in it, but there's so much opportunity to create something new and different and exciting, and yeah.
And Reese, don't be scared of single player games. I know that playing with your friends is really special, but I don't blame you for wanting to do that. But there's some real good stories that can actually like change your life. It's a wide world out there. So if you ever have any questions, let your mom ask me, and I can report back, because there's so much out there. It can really change your life. It certainly changed mine, and I feel really grateful that I'm 37 and I still play video games every day, and I love it, and it's changed everything. So there's lots of options for you. Or keep playing Fortnite. There's no shame in Fortnite or Call of Duty, and I would never. I love those games. I would never fault that. But there's some really meaningful stories that you're at an age where you can really get into your feelings, and video games can be a real cathartic experience and a release for you too. So, not to embarrass you, don't embarrass him.
No. The thing that like blows me away about him and his friends is they'll be playing on video games, and they'll be playing something in front of them. They'll be on their phones at the same time. There will be like Spotify happening in their ears, which is their own music, and like they're talking to each other on micro. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, how many different things can we have going at the same time?
Best friend never happened.
But see, now Reese can say, listen, don't put on Spotify. We have to listen to the in-game music if we're going to play games together. Now you can be a vessel for change, Reese. It's up to you. Well, listen, thank you both for spending time with me today. And hopefully you learned something new, and it was an enjoyable experience. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And we'll talk to you later. Bye, everybody. See you later. Bye.